Thank you very much. Piggybacking off of that, it sounds very much as if you two in the Ohio Green Party want to make connections between players inside the state of Ohio and nationwide. What is the Green Party's platform for the state of Ohio, and how does it intend on making those connections?
Thank you. So one thing that I will talk about first is our efforts at coalition building. The Green Party came out of the environmental movement of the 1970s before it was an official party in Ohio. So it does have long roots within activist communities and the environmental movement. And so one thing that we're trying to do as we're campaigning around the state is really reaching out to all of these activist groups, the citizens groups. There are a lot of nonpartisan citizens groups and still more environmental groups, people's groups. We're trying to do coalition building and reaching out to those groups and letting them know, whatever your prior political affiliation is, you can have a home in the Green Party. So we're at a point right now where we have seen a lot of growth within the past 2 years, since 2016. And in the most recent primary, our numbers have increased, I think, as much as 60%. So we're really growing a lot right now, and so we're reaching out to a lot of the socialist groups, a lot of the people's movements, social justice groups, and letting them know that if you want to run candidates, if you want to be involved, we're a people-oriented party, and we're also an activist, informed party. So when we're creating our platform, we're hearing from these anti-fracking groups and community rights groups about the issues that they're working on. SPAN, Single Payer Action Network, is a group that has advocated for many years on universal health care. So we're getting a lot of our platform points from these activist groups and trying to build coalitions as we're going along. So, do you want to talk a little bit more?
Sure. So, part of the question I think pertains to when we're talking about our platform. What is different about? What do we bring to the table? What do we bring into this conversation as a third party? When you have the two major parties that are following the news of the day, whatever's current right now, immigration policy, criminal justice, et cetera, Supreme Court appointments. There's a lot that's happening, and there's a lot that's happening in our politics that is keeping us distracted and keeping us in a reactive mode. And so one of the things that through our candidacy that we're bringing to the table is to change the discourse so that we can really focus on solutions rather than party. We are out to disrupt and to break this pattern of this zero-sum, knock-down, drag-out fight between the two major parties that is keeping us stuck. And all you have to do is go travel around the state and meet with people, look at both people that are in the problem areas and are not, are patiently looking for change and feeling disempowered and outside of the system because of voter suppression and the other ways, the gerrymandering, the other ways that our democracy itself is under assault. But also to look at the people that are working in the solution areas. A lot of times it's the same people, the people that go through very difficult experiences, such as our re-entering citizens, such as people that have lost jobs due to layoffs and are now looking at ways to form worker-owned co-ops or other ways to still be able to put food on the table. And there's a lot of innovation happening. So what we aim to do with the Green Party, and this is reflected in our platform, is to really focus on community-based solutions, and that means community rights and community economic development. How we go about that involves a change in the way we look at our budget priorities so that we're reinvesting more in people rather than, for example, some of the large tax abatements and other forms of corporate welfare that are siphoning the wealth out of our communities. We want to keep keep our community strong, not only in terms of balancing the budget and recasting what it means to be fiscally responsible so that it's inclusive of the real measures of progress, which is in terms of public health and in terms of quality education and all those other things that really matter to people. But we also want to take the long view beyond just the next election cycle and ask ourselves, what are the investments that we need to make in order to avoid some of these ticking time bombs that are going off. And we're seeing that in droves in the environmental area with the plastics and the toxic hotspots, but we're also seeing it across the board in the economy, where the same repeating patterns are happening. So both in the politics as well as in the economy itself, we believe the solutions need to come from the people, and that only comes from revitalizing our democracy.
And a few of our top issues in 2018. Of course, we want to protect the environment. We'd like to see an immediate moratorium on fracking in Ohio and injection wells in order to protect our water and our clean environment. We also want to transition to clean energy by 2030. And so we'd like to transition off of dirty industries and have a super fund for workers to support coal and people in the energy industry, and then transition to worker-owned and community-owned energy co-ops, so energy manufacturing and production. Food justice is an important issue. With all of the fertile farmland we have in Ohio, no one should ever have to go hungry, and we have the ability to feed everyone in Ohio. Meanwhile, there are so many hungry children and people living in poverty in Ohio. That's something that doesn't need to happen if we properly manage our resources. Social justice, I think, is a huge issue in Ohio. We'd like to see a massive overhaul of our criminal justice system in Ohio, including local courts, ending the school-to-prison pipeline, stopping the death penalty in Ohio, and ending or limiting privatized prisons in Ohio. Of course, the Green Party was the first party to start talking about legalized and decriminalized marijuana. So as part of that, we have a terrible opiate epidemic here. I really believe that we need to decriminalize drugs and start treating drug addiction as a health condition, not a criminal issue. Right now, privatized prisons are lobbying to keep marijuana and other drugs illegal so that they can fill their beds in the prison for a profit. I would just say that for-profit prisons do not have a moral imperative to punish. They have an obligation to their stockholders. All right, we want to fund a universal health care system, and this is also something that can help with the opiate epidemic and help small business owners in our local economy. We need to move to a constitutional school funding model in Ohio, and we'll end school funding based on property taxes. We want to ensure that local governments have the resources they need to operate. And most importantly, perhaps, is we have an anti-corruption party platform. The Greens are not beholden to any corporations. We are responsible to the people. We don't accept corporate donations, and we will save millions in our budget by cutting corporate giveaways and tax abatements. We'll privilege small business owners in Ohio, green and sustainable businesses, and cooperatives. We'll keep our money local and prevent it from leaving the state, which takes money away from our schools. Okay, thank you.
How does any of this happen? What are the steps?
Okay. All right, thank you. So I think starting with broadening our base, one of the big challenges that we have is we really need to get the word out about the party and what we have to offer. We are going to be engaging in a voter registration effort and really reaching out to disenfranchised voters. About 2/3 of registered voters are unaffiliated. So we have you know, a lot of people that we can talk to who are not already a member of the Democratic or Republican Party. So we're going to be looking at those unaffiliated voters. We're going to be going into areas of Ohio that we haven't been to previously, and reaching out to people, just talking to people, going door to door, business to business, like we did today, and just reaching out to let people know that the Green Party exists.
Also, through coalition building, you know, we can get beyond the red-blue dynamic. So that's why, as Connie mentioned, we're reaching out into, in a very non-dogmatic way, very solution-oriented way, because this is where we can find the common ground. And also focusing on values. That's our bedrock. We do support fair districts. We have this initiative that's on the ballot, but it's a watered-down version. And if you look at how that plays out, if there's not agreement, you know, or you know, what will be reflected in a 5/3 vote, you're back to basically having the majority incumbent party selecting the districts. And you see where that goes. Now they are emboldened by the Supreme Court decision down in Texas, and we're, you know, and democracy is still on the chopping block. But more fundamentally than that, because we're really about looking at fundamental change to the system that is undermining our democracy. That requires civic engagement. You know, what we describe as a war on democracy is on many fronts right now. You know, between this emphasis on fake news or shock politics, or just the effort to really keep people in a state of confusion and imbalance. And what we're seeing is a pattern that is really we've seen before in history. It is the kind of politics that is the hallmark of tyrants and despots. And the only real bulwark we have against that is robust civic engagement by communities. So we're really focusing on what's happening in at the community level. But before people can get engaged in trying to make their communities and their society better, they have to have their basic needs met. So it's all one common strategy to be focusing on meeting the basic needs of people. That's why we support raising the minimum wage. It's why we support facilitating transitions in small business to keep the doors open and so forth, so that we become an economy of producers, to where people feel comfortable enough in their security, their basic economic and health security, to be able to do the next thing, which is the natural impulse of people, and that is to reach out and share the wealth and be involved in their communities. But when people are struggling to survive just to stay above water, then we see civic engagement goes down, and we enter into a vicious cycle of decline. And it's that cycle that we're trying to break.
How do we bring about accountability in our government and our business?
Right now, it seems like we are dealing with a culture of corruption. With so much privatization in our state, I think you see a lot of giveaways. Politicians are hooking up their friends, and they're giving large government contracts to their donors. I think that we need to reinvest in our public resources, reinvest in public schools. When we see so much privatization, I think that there's been a trend of fraud, corruption, and waste. And when you're operating schools or prisons or other institutions for a profit, you're going to see a lot of that money leaving the system that it's trying to operate and go into the pockets of the business owners. They're running it for a profit, not for the public benefit. So there are certain things that should be in the under the sphere of government, that they should be publicly run and administered that way. Such as prisons. I mean, just as an example, the privatized prison industry is now punishing Ohioans for a profit. It's profitable to punish us and to criminalize a lot of things that should not be criminalized. So I think that's just one example. Accountability, transparency, and holding people accountable for this type of corruption. And we need to create a culture where people are not afraid to speak up if they see corruption. Right now, we have a culture that punishes the person who speaks up and who sheds the light on that corruption. So I think that is a cultural change that needs to happen, and I think that you know that with Green Party candidates that we are not bought out by big corporations. We're not accepting any campaign donations from corporate PACs or large corporations, out-of-state corporations. We're funded only by the people, and it's a grassroots movement. Our heart is with the people, and that's who we represent. That's who we're going to represent as we move forward.
What policies could the Green Party governorship bring to bear on business and on government so that services are delivered?
It's not just government, it is the private sector. So one of the points about accountability is that we need to have transparency in those instances where you have these large contracts that are going out to private sector providers of government services. Our government is becoming more and more privatized, and with this obsession with privatization, we're getting less and less transparency. We saw anti-fracking ordinances or local ordinances to ban the puppy mills or to to eliminate other practices that would be detrimental to the public health, that are more beneficial, more protective of the public health or the public safety than the statewide minimum standards have throughout most of the history of this state have been sustained in the courts, and yet now we are seeing the misuse of eminent domain authorities and state preemption authorities to keep us at the bottom, the least common denominator, which is really placing a chill on community innovation. And it goes to your point about how do we make the change. We need to change. That's one of those leverage points where if we get a new constitutional amendment that allows not only municipalities but also townships to be able to enact community bills of rights that are enforceable vis-a-vis state preemption, within limits, obviously, within the limits of constitutional civil rights and so forth, but to at least equalize and then tilt the equation as between corporate rights, which have continuously been upheld both legislatively and judicially through these judicial appointments, versus individual and community rights, which have been consistently eroded. This has been the long-term trend. So by breaking that cycle through a constitutional amendment, we can change the dynamic and empower our communities to be able to be those incubators of change that will take us into the 21st century. And I should mention that there is a constitutional amendment right now that is being circulated as a petition by the Community Environmental Rights Legal Defense Fund, and we are aligned with what they're trying to do.
Also, I would like to just point out that the governor's office appoints the heads of departments, so the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Agriculture and Commerce, Education. And so, what I have seen in the Kasich administration is that he has really, in terms of the environment, privileged business over the environment and acted as if there's a conflict between the interests of business and the environment. So the policy has been to exploit nature and to externalize the costs of doing business in Ohio. So I'm a firm believer that the interests of business and nature and workers are not so much in conflict as it's been made out to be. I think that we can have a business-friendly Ohio that also is friendly to the environment and to workers. So I think so often there's a divide and conquer mentality, especially between workers and the environment. If you want jobs, you know, we've had jobs in fracking, jobs exploiting our natural resources, and as incidentally, those jobs are also exploiting the workers too. You see their health effects as they're, you know, coal miners suffering from black lung disease. My grandfather was a coal miner who had black lung disease, and I think that it's really important to protect workers, make sure they have a good living conditions, working conditions, and a living wage, and that we can further our green energy industry and be a leader in green energy in Ohio. So I think that, you know, as we're moving forward, it's important to look at how we're making those appointments in those various departments of Ohio and setting the agenda. And so we want to have a people-friendly agenda that is really bringing together all of those interests and not necessarily just making those appointments based on, you know, who our buddies are in business. That's not what we're trying to do. So I do think that that is a way to kind of open up our flow of ideas, that brings new ideas and new possibilities and opportunities in politics, that we can be creative in how we frame these issues so that we can really do a good job representing all Ohioans and kind of step outside of that box that we're confined in here within the two-party system.
And the reason those values have sustained the Green Party over decades is because they are enduring. They are common values: sustainability, social justice, you know, nonviolence, and grassroots democracy, and all the other values that relate to those core pillars. And so, where did the party of Lincoln go? Or for that matter, where did the party of FDR, the New Deal, go? You know, they evolve over time. They're not the same party. They may have the same name, you know, color, as it were, as because of those values that Connie mentioned earlier. As I said, that's the bedrock. Those are, and the reason those values have sustained the Green Party over decades is because they are enduring. They are common values: sustainability, social justice, you know, nonviolence, and grassroots democracy, and all the other values that relate to those core pillars. And so those kind of values are human values. Okay, we're all human beings. We're all part of, you know, sharing this interdependent planet. I know that sounds very kind of pie in the sky, but in fact, what really, you know, when you focus on the values, it frees the way to be able to become a party and engage in kind of politics that is eminently practical. You know, you get away from the ideologically driven or the very dogmatic ways of defining the party by what's happening in the news or by the opposite of, you know, what the other party is advocating in this, you know, this struggle. I mean, if you look at the history of the two major parties, where did the party of Lincoln go? Or for that matter, where did the party of FDR, the New Deal, go? You know, they evolve over time. They're not the same party. They may have the same name, but they're certainly not espousing the same things that you know, have defined our country over time. So we need to actually have a politics that puts party on the back seat, you know, or puts partisanship behind and leads with the solutions and leads with what you know, what is really addressing the needs that we're in. Party is a vehicle, it's a way of organizing, it's a way of getting on the ballot, but it is not ultimately the end cause that we seek. It's not hooray for our team. It is about we the people and the power that we exercise if we are to endure as a democracy into this next century and beyond.
So if in November, on the night of the election, you look up and you see, wow, it's an Ocasio-Cortez moment. We beat, you know, DeWine, Houston, and Fordray, and like, they all outspent us, you know, a bajillion to one, and yet we still managed to win. What would you do to actually achieve your policies and things you want with a Republican or Democratic, mostly it's likely it's going to be a Republican-held General Assembly, that, you know, both parties will be blocking pretty much everything that you want to do. Like what methods would you use to get around that?
Thank you. Well, as soon as we would find out that we win the election, I would jump up and down and celebrate, of course, and then I think that we would be working on filling the appointments in the various departments of the Ohio government. So the Department of Commerce, the Department of Agriculture, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Education. And as I'm looking for individuals to fill those positions, I'm not going to be looking at what party they have been affiliated with. I'm going to be looking at who can do the best job to fill that position. So I think that we're going to be looking for people with expertise, people who are willing to carry out our policy agenda, but who have some background. You know, in the Department of Commerce, somebody who has a background in business. That's not inappropriate. However, you've seen, like in the Department of Natural Resources, sometimes people who have no background whatsoever in natural resource management, or they're really just trying to exploit our natural resources for profit. So you see a lot of political appointments currently by people who are actually hostile to the industry. The Department of Education at the national level, you see Betsy DeVos, who's actually hostile to education, running the educational department. So I think that having appropriate appointments is a good first step to gaining people's trust. And it's not going to be based on what party they've been affiliated with. I think that we really want to emphasize that we are here to make a change and to represent all Ohioans. A lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, are going to hate us, but some of them are going to love us too. They're going to be glad about what we're bringing to the table. So I think that we can move away from some of the political polarization that you see. For instance, in the gun debate, it's so polarized either way. I think that we can find innovative solutions to that issue and to a lot of other issues that face us in Ohio. And I think that we will be able to gain the trust of the legislature through our professionalism, our civility, our willingness to work with everyone despite their political background. That's what we'll be bringing to the table.
As a third party, if we are successful at, in this election, it will signal the fact that the kind of politics, the kind of way that we're running this campaign, grassroots, people-driven, and non-dogmatic, looking at solutions first, is resonating with the public, and that will send a very strong signal that the two-party, zero-sum, race to the bottom kind of politics that we've seen is no longer going to be tolerated in the state of Ohio. So what we will be bringing into our work with the incumbents in the General Assembly is an opportunity that will free members of both parties to be able to pursue solutions in a manner that they have not been able to with being caught up in this struggle where the calculation currently is always a political calculation, but they're certainly not espousing the same things that have defined our country over time. So we need to actually have a politics that puts party on the back seat, or puts partisanship behind and leads with the solutions and leads with what is really addressing the needs that we're in. When we talk about a robust grassroots democracy, we're talking about participation, and we're talking about ending the systematic disenfranchisement of whole sectors of our society. And there's a lot of activism that's happening. There's a lot of issue campaigns. There's a lot of direct action that's happening. People have had enough of being disenfranchised and not being heard. And people are getting angry about that. You know, that's one aspect of Trumpism that we're seeing is people are just done with the institutional status quo. They want to be heard, even if it means creating a little bit of chaos along the way. But chaos will not get us where we need to go. Okay, so now, like I said, we're in this unique situation where the institutions of the two-party system are failing. Let's face it, they are, both parties are unraveling and they're scrambling around to try to figure out how they're going to go into the future. What's at stake and what we should be concerned about is not the future of the Democratic Party, the future of the Republican Party, but the future of our democracy. And our democracy requires participation, which means starting with the 4-H club and starting with the school council and all those different ways that people can get engaged and encouraging people to do so.
Very well said, Brett. Good job. Just one example, Brett and I have gone out into fracking country to speak with landowners as they're dealing with injection wells and leasing, land leasing, so their battle against land leasing in the fracking industry. And one thing that we heard when we were on, in fracking country on that tour, is that in some areas, the Democratic Party is so weak that people, even if they have left values or progressive values, are registering Republican just because they want to be involved in their, local government. That's how they can be active and, play a role there. So, so often I hear that the Green Party is going to take away votes from the Democrats especially. But I really think that we can appeal to people to the left and right of the political spectrum, and people who also don't see themselves, on the left or right, a lot of independence. So there are a lot of people who want civic engagement and are registered Republican because that's their only option. And you saw a lot of people voting for Trump because they wanted a rebel. They wanted somebody who was going to shake things up and destroy the two-party system. And I think that what they got was much worse than they expected in a lot of cases. So, you will still see your diehard Trump fans, but a lot of the people that I heard, just really didn't like Hillary Clinton, and so they didn't really know about a lot of the other options. So we're presenting an option, a rational third option to people who are really dissatisfied with what the Democrats and the Republicans have to offer. I think that, the Democrats and Republicans have gotten us where we are today with the policies that we have. They have not represented women well. They haven't represented minorities well. They haven't represented the peace movement very well at all. And, we're here to fill in that void.
Closing remarks, and we'll get to wrap up after that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been really wonderful to come out to Kent State and today we got to go in the business district and talk to local business owners. My name again is Constance Gadell-Newton, and I'm running for governor of Ohio as a Green. If you'd like more information about our platform and policies, we have a website. It's constanceforohio.org. And again, we are an all-people funded campaign, and we're an activist-informed campaign. So we're reaching out to people around the state. We want to represent all Ohioans, and so we want to hear from people. What are your concerns? What do you really think? And of course, we want to hear from everybody. We're willing to listen to people in an open and honest political dialogue, to hear your ideas, and to hear, maybe how you're not being represented. at this point. So we really want to represent the people. We're here for the people, not corporations. And as we go forward, it's going to be an open and honest political dialogue. And we're going to be working on issues that help Ohioans, like universal health care, decarceration, improving our educational system, and ending the de facto segregation of Ohio schools. We are going to be building local economies in Ohio that are thriving and help promote locally owned green energy co-ops and green jobs, things that really support and sustain the people. And we're going to be looking to promote our sustainable agriculture and promote a clean, safe, healthy environment in Ohio.
So thank you for the opportunity. This has been a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate the questions. Obviously we're facing some very large problems. Many of those problems in the state have to do with the neglect that we've seen for decades on those investments that we need to really build up and support the means to be productive into the future. So we need to have continued conversation that is outside of the partisan type of propaganda and negative campaigning that we're seeing with the two major parties. And the way to do that is what we've started here and are going to continue to do between now and November, and that is to have a series of these types of meetings. I really enjoyed the tour, going around talking to small business people in Dover and in Philadelphia, and I look forward to coming back and further engaging. We're going to be doing this all around the state, both between the community forums and the one-on-one conversations, so that we can, instead of talking about civil dialogue, what we need to do, let's just do it. Let's just have that dialogue. And the way we're running the campaign, in dialogue without discrimination as to people's political point of view or too much over-calculation or three-dimensional chess or whatever. Let's just talk about issues where both the issues are, and let's talk about solutions. And we're going to do that wherever we can around the state. We have 88 counties in the state, and we have a full agenda, but there's still other places we still need to get to, and so we encourage anyone that sees this video or that would like to invite us into their town to have similar dialogues to just contact us. Let's keep it going. And as we have this dialogue, perhaps you can see the way we would govern after November 6th, because it's this commitment that we are hopefully demonstrating in this process to an inclusive kind of politics, and in politics where we don't claim to have all the answers and are always open to critical feedback and to new ideas without having to claim all the credit. Let's give credit where credit is due, because many of the best solutions are coming from the people themselves. In fact, I would say all of the best solutions come from the people themselves. Thank you.
Constance Gadell-Newton. Brett Joseph. Thank you very much.
Thank you.